Welcome back into our second half hour of Module 4.2. We'll continue our conversation with regard to what is the gospel, why Jesus was born. We're going to pick up exactly where we left off in our first hour. So Christ came. He came and he died to pay for our sin and thus open up the trail that we could enter into the presence of God. That's how we get to he is our salvation captain. He is the archekos. Why he came to die? He came to suffer and die. We can clearly see that in Hebrews chapter 2, verse 9 and 10. Let's go back. You can never read the scriptures enough. But we do see him who was made for a little while lower than the angels, namely Jesus, because of the suffering of death, crowned with glory and honor, so by the grace of God he might taste death for everyone. And this flows right into the next verse, verse 10. For it was fitting for him, for whom all things and through whom all things, in bringing many sons to glory, he says, to perfect the author, the captain, the archekos, the trailblazer of their salvation through sufferings. You see how he's a trailblazer? You see the language. Now, we don't speak in this kind of a language in our modern day vernacular, but this is the language that's being used in the scriptures because it's painting a picture. And he had to die to do it. Now look at what it says. He was made perfect through what? He was made perfect through what? How was Jesus? Think about this. If we ask this question, okay, let's just ask this question. Think about this. If we ask the question, how was Jesus made perfect? The answer is, this is the question, and here's the answer. By suffering. A lot of people really struggle with that answer. By suffering. Go back to Hebrews chapter 5, verse 8. Let's go back to Hebrews chapter 5, verse 8. Look at this. Although he was a son, he is capitalized. A son, S is capitalized. He is capitalized, learned obedience from the things which he, capitalized, suffered. Do you see that? Do you see that? This is what the verse is talking about. It says, look at it with me in a way, I want you to see this with me. It says, although he was a son, he learned obedience. Look at it. Although he was a son, he learned obedience from the things which he suffered. You know, that's my pet peeve. Slow down in the reading of the text. Look at what it actually says. There was no way, there was absolutely no way that Jesus could arrive in the world and say, listen, everybody, listen up to me. Hear me out. Follow me. We're going to God. Well, who are you? No, you cannot. There's no way you can get into the presence of God, even though he may have said that. When there is what? When there is unpunished sin. We still have the sin factor. We still have the issue of sin has to be settled. So he just could not have come and said, just follow me. We're becoming sons of glory to come into the glory of the presence of God. No, something had to happen. He had to suffer. That's the reason why when we start out this series, okay, on this particular section, why was Jesus born? We wrote up on the board and we said he came to suffer and die. Remember that? We didn't just say he came to die. And a number of you asked the question, well, why did you put it that way? Because he came to suffer and die. If there is no suffering for the sin and the dying of the sin, then you and I cannot be ushered into glory as sons of glory. And you see, that's why he had to suffer to be the perfect leader, to be the archekos. He could not lead us to God unless he had paid for the price of sin through his suffering. Again, that's what Hebrews chapter 5 verse 8 says. Chapter 5 verse 8 says, although he was a son, he learned obedience from the things which he suffered. You see, he became the perfect archekos, the perfect pioneer, the perfect trailblazer, the perfect leader, the perfect author of our salvation. And only by dying for us, he can open the path. And he opened it wide so that many sons, he opened it very wide so that many, many, many sons can come to glory by following Jesus Christ. Okay? He paid for sin. And you know something, and I don't know if you think about it. Do you realize that all this took place? Let me put up here. Do you realize that all of this took place in 3 All of this took place in 3 hours. That is the shocking thing that most people never understand. All of this took place in 3 hours. Do you realize that? Did you know that? Did you know that people are going to spend eternity in hell? I'm not that smart. I'm not that bright. I'm not that intelligent. I'm just not a whole lot of things. And it's beyond my comprehension how to calculate that. But there'll be somebody out there trying to figure it out. All the brainiacs out there trying to figure out how to find out the infinite. But do you realize that people are going to spend eternity in hell? Just think about that for a moment. Who are we talking about? We're talking about godless people. We're talking about Christless people. We're talking about people an eternity in hell paying the penalty of sin. Just think about that. Christ achieved the archekos, blazed the trail in 3 hours. Those who are Christless, godless, will be in an eternity in hell. And Jesus, the archekos, he blazed the trail to glory in 3 hours. 3 hours. Do you know that Jesus gathered up an eternity of punishment? He gathered up an eternity of punishment and paid it all in 3 hours and then walked away from it as the risen Savior. What he did. That's power. That's incalculable power. Did you hear what I said? That's exactly what he did. The cross was a masterpiece, and God exhibited a solution to the problem that no human intelligence could ever answer. The problem of how does God communicate mercy and grace to a sinful people? He brought mercy and justice together at the cross. That's what he did. And Christ paid the penalty and bore the eternity of judgment in 3 hours. And he was not destroyed because I don't even know how. That's an incredible, powerful person. I don't have enough words in any language to describe that. And thus he became our perfect, again, archekos. He opened up the trail. Just think about it. Just think about that. Let me share something that I read about a number of years ago. And I want to share with you because it helps to paint the picture. Right? In the human realm, for us to understand this in the celestial realm. And I remember reading this a number of years ago, and when I was told about it, and I heard about it again in one of the pastors' conferences, so I went to look it up. I hear something, and I go, okay, where's that? I want to look it up. And so, and the story is about a Swiss patriot, okay, by the name of, and he had a very funny name, a strange name, is Arnold Winkelried. Arnold Winkelried. That's the guy's name. And Arnold, because Winkelried, I get my tongue-tied here, right? We'll just call him Arnold. And if you go to Switzerland today, okay, you'll see statues of this man called Arnold Winkelried because he was a very, very famous Swiss patriot. Now, Switzerland is considered a buffer zone or a buffer state. Just like when you see Israel, for example, okay, and you have Syria in the north, and you have Egypt in the south, and every time the Egyptians would have a battle with the Syrians, okay, or the Lebanese, or the Jordanians, would have a battle with the Egyptians or the Syrians back and forth, these countries would choose, can you imagine this? And they made the decision that the battlefield was always going to be Israel. That's the reason why Israel was getting destroyed over and over and over and over again. I mean, literally. These two countries that have nothing to do with Israel would declare war with each other, okay? And they chose the battlefield to be Israel, and they would destroy everything in its path over and over and over again. Well, this is exactly what happened in Europe with Switzerland. Switzerland became a buffer state. And so when Europeans would decide to have a war with each other, they always chose Switzerland as the battlefield. Just look it up in history, you'll find it, right? And so Switzerland was a buffer state, and it never really had any identity of its own except that everybody in Europe who wanted to fight a war went over to Switzerland to fight it. That's what they would do, over and over and over again. Finally, one day, it got to a point where the Swiss got tired of all this, okay? They did. They got tired of being the battlefield for everybody's armies. And the nations would be, in conflict, and they say, well, we'll meet on Switzerland soil and have a war. The two kings would agree to this, okay? The two heads of government, okay? June 1st, we're going to have a war, okay? We'll meet you there. And the Swiss people were just getting a little tired of all this nonsense, okay? And so they decided they were going to put up a resistance. Now, they will outgun, outman, out everything. In fact, basically, it was a decision of suicide for them. But they decided, nevertheless, to put up a resistance. And so there was this great army moving down from the north, from Germany now. It's coming down from Germany. And they used to march in what they call the phalanx. The phalanx, okay? And it's a funny word, okay? And this is what they would do. And it's a strange little word here. We don't use it much, okay? And the phalanx, okay, was this. It's about a mile or 2 miles long, okay? And of men in columns of two, and they'd be marching in columns of two, and this column will be a mile to 2 miles long. That was called the phalanx, okay? And the phalanx was basically this trail of soldiers. It'd be snake wine, okay? It's what they would do, okay? And they would march. And everybody knew there was going to be another war on their territory, right? And that's what happened. And it ran about a mile or 2 miles long. These guys were shoulder to shoulder, and all the troops behind them and all the frontline men have shields, okay? And they're all marching with their shields. And they got their armaments, okay? And they march like a sidewinder across the mountain, you know? They just be going. And you can hear the footsteps for miles. You can hear this because they're marching toward, and you have these two marching armies coming to fight each other. And now this great long string, now here's the important part of this, okay? And then all of the artillery and things are behind them. So they would have all of their cannons and everything else would be at the back coming, right? And so you would have this thing. Well, it's overwhelming to see an army of this size, of this magnitude coming. You don't know what to do with this thing. But all of the heavy artillery, all of their big guns was always in the back. And they would come sweeping down toward this village. Behind them coming. And this guy, Arnold Winkelried, okay, he decided that he had enough of this, and he was going to lead a small group of merry men, okay, this group of small army of men who were willing to attack this great army, okay? And they were all basically peasants is what they were. They were farmers. And they got together and they created a Swiss army, which did not exist. And they had made the decision they were going to stop this army if they could. So they began to think about all kinds of strategies, all kinds of ways. How we're going to stop this army? And you go, Brother Eddie, what are you talking about? What does this have to do with salvation? Just follow me. Watch this. And they began to strategize, and they knew there was only one way to do it. And that was to break the phalanx, okay? And to infiltrate it and destroy it from inside. They knew that they couldn't attack it from the outside. But how do you do that? How do you do that? And so as this great phalanx, this great army marching down toward the village, okay, where they were gathered, and what did they have? They had shovels, pitchforks, okay, sticks, staves. That was it. I mean, it's not like they had arrows and swords and all that kind of stuff, okay? And here's this phalanx coming, okay, this great army coming down, and they move closer to the village. And Arnold Winkelried, okay, with a cry to glory to Switzerland, started running. He starts to run. Now, you can imagine. Here comes the army. They can see it coming down, okay? And they're on the hillside, and these guys, and Arnold, he starts to run. He's running straight at this army from this direction. He's running by himself toward this phalanx. He's going to penetrate it from the side. And he takes off running for the glory of Switzerland. He's going to attack this thing. And what he did was that he actually broke through the phalanx, okay? He creates havoc. Now, this highly disciplined, okay, they begin to fall apart, okay, because they don't have no idea this thing is coming. And that's crucial to understanding this. But right on his heels, Arnold, not a yard behind him, was the entire Swiss army of peasants with shovels and pitchforks. And the story is that they defeated this great European army and drove them all back in one day. You see, when Arnold came by himself, right behind him, no more than a yard, was all of these peasants. And they busted through the lines on the side, which they didn't see coming. They created such havoc, such confusion. And in one day, they defeated this great European army. That's exactly what happened. Now, Arnold charged and kept charging, and they filled his body as he's charging with arrows, and he died, which is why he became a great Swiss martyr, a hero. But behind him was all these hundreds of peasants with staffs and sticks and shovels and pitchforks, okay? And they created such havoc and such confusion and defeated the army in one day. He ran right into but look, you know what he did? He ran right smack into them and defeated them. They were on their heels. They just did not expect that at all. It was incredible. Well, that's exactly what Jesus Christ did. He did the same thing. Jesus ran into the battalion of hell itself as our salvation captain, as the Archekos. He charged the battalion of hell. He gathered all of the arrows and the spears and the wrath and the judgment from God could send at him. He gathered up, and then he bursted right through the battalions of hell itself. And you'll ask, and all he asks you to do is to follow him and claim the victory, because he's the perfect Archekos. He trailed the blaze. The victory is there. It's yours. And so we see that, number one, he is our what? Our substitute. And number two, he is our salvation captain. He became that because he died and he was born for no other reason. Jesus was born for no other reason than to suffer and die. That's exactly what he did here. Now I want you to see this with me. Let's take this one more step. Let's take this one more step. So we said that he was, number one, our substitute. We said, number two, that he is, that he is our salvation captain, right? That's what we said, okay? Now, he is now, number three, let's put this, Jesus is our sanctifier. Okay. The third thing that we discover as we read this text, go back to Hebrews chapter 2 with me. And let's look at verses 11, 12, and 13. Let's look at this in Hebrews chapter 2, verses 11 to 13. Let's look at this together. Okay? He is our sanctifier. Now, when you look at this, let's read the text. Verse 11. For both he who sanctifies and those who are sanctified are all from the one Father, for which reason he is not ashamed to call them brethren. saying, I will proclaim your name to my brethren in the midst of the congregation. I will sing your praise. And again, I will put my trust in him. And again, behold, I and the children whom God has given me. He is our what? Our sanctifier. Now look at what he says in verse 11. We see this. We see this in verse 11. Okay? Look at what he says in verse 11. For both he who sanctifies. Now this is a key phrase. For both he. This is crucial. Who sanctifies. That's the phrase that we want to focus in on for the moment. Okay? Now, when we look at this phrase, what does that mean? For both he who sanctifies. Well, he, that is Christ, that is talking about Christ. He is the one who sanctifies. This is like when you talk about yourself in the third person. Yeah. It's Christ talking about Christ. For he who sanctifies. That's literally what's happening here, okay? He who sanctifies. Now, this word sanctified is going to be this Greek word. It's called hagiazo, okay? Hagiazo. Hagiazo. Okay. He, for both he who sanctifies. That's what the phrase says here. Look at this. Okay. In other words, it means to make holy. That's what it means. It means to make holy. That's what it literally means. He that makes holy, and they who are holy are all one, of which cause he is not ashamed to call them what? Brethren. Go back to verse 11. For he who sanctifies and those who are sanctified are all from one Father. Now look at this. For which, what does the end of verse 11 say? For which reason he is not ashamed to call them brethren. That is probably one of the most thrilling, most amazing things that you can read. It's one of those concepts that's beyond our ability to comprehend and wrap our heads around. And I want you to see it. It's unbelievable. You know what this tells us? Listen to this. Jesus Christ is holy, and he is capable of making you and I holy. We are the holy ones in verse 11. He is holy, and they are holy all through how? His death. Okay. So we come to the point, how do we become holy? Through the death of Christ. It's how we become holy. Through the death of Christ. This is what he's talking about. We're still in verse 11. For both he who sanctifies and those who are sanctified are all from one Father, for which reason he is not ashamed to call them what? Brethren. Now listen to this. Through his death and our faith in him, believing and receiving him as Savior, we are now declared holy. Did you get that? We are being declared holy. That is what this is what we would call a positional truth. This is what we call a positional truth. That's your position. Your position is in Christ and Christ alone.